Hey everybody, welcome back to the Wayback Chronicles podcast. This is Steve. I'm back with my good friends Noel Kirsch and Keith Abbott. How you doing, guys?
Good.
Hello.
Awesome. Well, hey, welcome back to episode 2 of season 2 of 1978. And today Keith's going to take us through world events and politics. So, Keith, take us down the crazy happenings in our world that year.
So 1978 was about as interesting in world events as it was in the music episode. And you did an awesome job on music, Steve.
Thank you.
So what I thought I would do is talk a little bit kind of from chronologically again, because it's kind of hard to wrap world events and politics up in kind of a summary. So I'm going to just briefly talk about some of the highlights that happened in 1978 globally. I'm sure that some of these probably could be touched up in a mashup too, but I felt like they were as impactful for a world event as it could be. So 1978 world events, the one interesting thing that started off in February 27th was the Rockwell International Corporation created and launched the first global positioning satellite. And can you imagine life today without GPS, right? So, wow. So Navstar 1 is launched by the United States on February 27th of 1978. And obviously it definitely wasn't something that was consumer driven at that point, but think about everyday life with us now. Could you imagine not having that? So again, coming back from things that were relevant even more so today than back then. And I may have messed you up, Noel, because that could have been also a technology thing. So please feel free to bring it up. Our listeners would probably forget by then anyway.
Crossing that off my list right now.
I can't ever remember. You're welcome. I can't ever remember what I walked in this room for, so it's fine. So here's an interesting one. So everyone is familiar with who Charlie Chaplin is, right? He was very famous silent film artist. On the 1st of March, 1978, Charlie Chaplin passed away, and Charlie Chaplin's coffin was dug up and stolen from its grave by Roman Wardas and Gancho Ganev. I hope I said their names right. The body was held for ransom in an attempt to extort money from his widow, Una Chaplin. I don't know how to pronounce her name, but she basically inherited $100 million from Chaplin, and the pair were trying to hold his body for ransom to get some of that money. And the pair were caught in a large police operation in May of this year, and Chaplin's coffin was found buried in a field in a nearby village of Noville, just a few miles down the road from where they covered it. But they basically reinterred the coffin into the cemetery, and it was reinforced with concrete. So I thought that was kind of interesting, not necessarily a political event, but weird stuff. That's what I like about the 70s is we were hoping for there to be strange events, because we thought that when we think of the 70s, we think there were some odds and ends that were crazy. So I've decided to integrate some of that into the politics, because you know how much I love politics. But anyway, so
real quick, Keith, it brings a interesting, like, what would you do scenario. So say you were Charlie Chaplin's widow, so you already have the money, the guy's in the ground. I mean,
he did.
I don't know. I mean, I got the money. I don't know. It's feel like a jerk for saying that, but
I mean, I guess they got caught. She kept her money. Everything was good anyway. But yeah, it does present a really interesting scenario there.
Yeah.
So in 1978, the president of the United States was Jimmy Carter, as we know, and it was and I'll talk a little bit more about U.S. politics in a little bit. But April 7th was something that was interesting. So Jimmy Carter decides to postpone the production of the neutron bomb on April 7th of this year. What the neutron bomb is basically a weapon that kills people with radiation but leaves little damage to buildings. So April 18th, this is something that caused a lot of dissent amongst Americans. I think anybody that was any of our parents at this time probably disagreed with this move, but the U.S. Senate on April 18th votes 68-32 in favor to turn the Panama Canal over to the Panamanian control. And that was to happen on December 31st of 1999. So 21 years later, they decide to turn the Panama Canal over to control of the Panama government, which in a way makes sense. But a lot of patriotism was there saying, hey, this was our thing, and we're just giving up something that we build and have pride in with a mechanical or marvel. So kind of interesting there that something like that happened. And I remember my parents were pretty hacked off that happened. I don't know if you all remember this at all.
I don't remember this at all, man. I was like 4. So
right.
I mean,
no problem.
So hold on. Let's back up. So the Panama Canal was built by us, the Americans,
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Yep.
as a way of like a passageway between like one side of the ocean to the other side of the ocean, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, basically it was a shorter connection than having to go all the way to the bottom of South America.
Right, and come around. So basically a shortcut.
Yeah, it was basically a trans-Isthmian canal that President Teddy Roosevelt oversaw the realization of. So it was built between 1903 and 1914 as a way to get things put through a little bit faster. So
we turned over control voluntarily in 1978 to the Panamanian government.
Basically said that at that point we will turn over all control of the canal. It was basically a big foreign policy achievement at the time for the U.S. and I believe it was Great Britain that also facilitated that to happen. So, but yeah, and so they turned over control to the Panama government, basically just relinquishing any rights or control we had to it.
That's weird.
So,
I can understand why people would be ticked off about it.
Yeah, I mean, you think about a lot of this was almost a century in the making, and another one of those things that was a marvel of engineering, showing American strength and ingenuity. So those kind of things. A lot of folks during the 70s, that you alluded to this in music, is there was a lot of pride, a lot of stuff going on in the world, and that was just another thing that a lot of those people of that era were pretty upset about, just because they liked the not the power trip, but I just think the pride in the country.
Yeah.
So switching to global events, there was a huge coup d'etat in Afghanistan, where President Khan was killed and his family was murdered during a Marxist military coup d'etat. Nur Muhammad Taraki succeeds him. And the reason this is significant is this was the event that began the war in Afghanistan that to this day still hasn't totally been settled. I mean, we just talked about the U.S. evacuating Afghanistan and pulling out of that just last year in 2022, right? So, I mean, even to this day, this whole event with President Khan being killed really instigated all of this polarity in Afghanistan, all of this infighting. And, if you remember, sometime later, the Russian government was in a war with Afghan. There was an Afghan-Russian war.
10 years.
So, 10 years. And so a lot of things spun. And that's what's interesting about looking at some of the politics of 1978 is there were a lot of these events that caused a snowball effect down the road, some for good, some for bad. But that was one in Afghanistan that was a pretty big deal, I thought. So pretty cool.
You're seeing the movie Charlie Wilson's War?
Yes.
I haven't. Is it good?
Yeah. So very much about this story.
Really?
Senator or Congressman Wilson, who was actually, I believe, from Nacogdoches, Texas, probably butchered the town. I know it's in East Texas. But anyway, he was the congressperson that really started to get U.S. funding to fight a covert war against the Russians to support Afghanistan. So you think of it at the time, our ally was Afghanistan, and not so much now. But it is really what helped sort of create that Cold War. Was today we send a lot of money to Ukraine, but we're not the least bit covert about that. We're very blatant about that.
Yeah.
But of course, Russia started to get smart. Hey, holy cow, they're shooting down our helicopters now. They must got American weaponry somehow. But yeah, if you haven't seen it, definitely a good tie into what you're talking about.
That's the one with Tom Hanks, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, yeah, definitely want to see that. So good stuff. Charlie Wilson's War. So, so that was a big deal. Continuing to this day. The next thing I thought was kind of interesting. A couple of events that happened in sports. Since we're not covering sports as a tactical thing, I thought this would be good for a world event. And it was kind of timely to tie into what we were talking about for our first year. So on May 18th of this year, Sarajevo, Yugoslavia, is selected to host the 1984 Winter Olympics. And Los Angeles, which we talked about in 84, was selected this year to host the 84 Summer Olympics, which we've all talked about. This is probably the year that most of us remember the most as far as an Olympic year goes. So I thought it was interesting that this was the year that happened. The other interesting thing, and I know Steve is going to be pumped about this, I selected this just for you, is on June the 1st, the 1978 FIFA World Cup starts in Argentina. So between that and Lawrence Wilk, I figured that Steve would be. Wake up, bro! Are you okay? Are you there?
Sorry,
Are you there?
Sorry.
Oh,
soccer.
that's okay. That's okay.
Football.
Football. So we'll talk a little bit more about that World Cup and who wins later, but I just thought it was just for you. So, and here's another interesting tie-in to another podcast that we talked about is on June 9th. Very significant thing happened. Ford issues a recall of the Pinto due to public outcry resulting from deaths associated with gas tank explosions. And we tie this into the top secret movie.
Yes.
That's right. So that was a significant event in
movies of all time.
That's right. So big world event at that time. The Pinto explosions caused a massive recall. So interesting thing there. So other fun things that happened in June the 19th, the first comic strip for the comic Garfield came out.
I love Garfield as a kid, man.
Yes, me too. It started locally as a comic strip called John, but it goes into nationwide syndication in 1978 as Garfield. So kind of interesting. Wow. Following along and stay with us, Steve. June 25th, Argentina defeats the Netherlands 3-1 after extra time to win the 1978 FIFA World Cup. There you go. Hang on to your hat.
Steve's life changed forever.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So another interesting thing that happened that same day on June 25th, and something that's really relevant to the landscape of the country today, is the rainbow flag of the LGBT movement flies for the first time in San Francisco. Anyway, so that's what happened in June. July had a few things happen, and one thing that I think is awesome, but I'm going to defer that to Noel. It was a super awesome video game. And I'm going to let you talk about this technology. And if we ever need to, it might be something, the more I read about it, it might be a deep dive into a single episode. There's a couple of things in here. Yeah. I don't want to give it away. You're going to do technology. I know you're still researching it. So I'm just going to tee it up for you, Noel. I'm not going to steal your thunder. So,
all right.
But you'll know. Okay. Right. So here's another thing in July 25th, Louise Brown is the first test tube baby that was born in Oldham, Greater Manchester, United Kingdom. So that was the year of the test tube baby, Louise Brown. Do you all remember that?
Nope.
I think I do. Yeah.
I remember a little bit about it, but not a whole lot, but I thought that was pretty interesting there. So that's about halfway through the year. A lot of crazy events that happened, but like I say, it was just all sorts of strange, random things went on. On August 12th, the Treaty of Peace and Friendship occurred between the countries of Japan and the People's Republic of China. So it is concluded on that day that creates just kind of a peace accord between those two countries. Pretty big deal if you think about the amount of things that occur between those two countries globally. So pretty good and interesting thing that they decided to have a treaty of peace and friendship between the two. August 21st. Now, I think this, again, is something that is a big enough deal that it would warrant a deep dive. And the more I kind of went down a rabbit hole after I started learning about this next thing, because I think it's so significant that it probably deserves its own thing. But there were 12 scientists from a company called Genentech, and they succeeded and beat out massive, huge, multi-billion-dollar companies like Eli Lilly and those to create and develop the first synthetic human insulin.
Oh, wow.
And to read the story about how that was created. Before that, just to give you a little brief thing, before that, insulin was created by livestock, and it took like hundreds of livestock to produce a small amount of insulin to help. And can you imagine? I mean, diabetes is a very big issue in the world today, especially in the United States. And to be able to have human insulin developed synthetically has really changed and saved a lot of people's lives, really. Yeah. So again, this is a company of 12 employees that created this. And it's just, it's a cool, 12 employees. Genentech was a company of 12 employees that beat out all of these multi-billion-dollar mammoth companies to develop this first human insulin. Then it was passed on to Eli Lilly to do tests and everything to be approved. But pretty interesting there. And I thought that I really think that it's worthy of a deep dive if we ever want to do some one-off episodes, because I went down a massive rabbit hole learning about that.
Yeah.
So pretty cool. August 26th. So a lot of different things happen in August 26th. Now, this one's an interesting one. So Pope John Paul I succeeds Pope Paul VI as the 263rd Pope. But here's the interesting thing. He dies on September 28th after only 33 days of papacy.
Oh, wow.
So he was a pope for only 33 days. And so that was what's interesting is this, and I'll talk about this a little bit, but this was one of the few years, and I'll go ahead and talk about this on October 16th. Pope John Paul succeeds Pope John Paul I. The second succeeds the first. And I remember Pope John Paul, I'm not a Catholic, but I remember him vividly. As one of the most well-known popes, but he succeeded them as the 264th Pope. But here's the interesting. This was the first year that there were 3 popes since the year 1605. And so Pope John Paul II is the first Polish Pope in history and the first non-Italian Pope since Pope Adrian VI in 1522. So interesting stuff about the Pope. So an interesting year of being 3 popes in the same year.
3 popes.
3 popes. So, here's another interesting thing that was coordinated with President Carter. It was the Camp David Accords that happened on September the 17th, and it was basically the Camp David Accords is another deep dive. But in summary, it was basically a pair of political agreements signed by Egyptian President Anwar Sadat and an Israeli Prime Minister. I don't even know how to pronounce his name. I'm so sorry, but it's Menachem Begin or Begin, Begin. I don't know. I'm going to call him Giuseppe Verdi or Joe Green to you.
There you go.
I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, it's, and I apologize because I do not know this person's name.
He's probably not listening right now.
Yeah, hopefully not. But to our listeners who are big into world events, I apologize for that, because the Camp David Accords were a result of 14 months of diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Israel, and the United States that began after President Carter became president. And the efforts initially focused actually on a comprehensive resolution of disputes between Israel and the Arab countries, but it gradually evolved into a search for a bilateral agreement between Israel and Egypt. Both the Prime Minister of Israel and the Egyptian president were the Nobel Peace Prize winners, co-winners on October 27th of this year. So kind of interesting. So now here's where some sort of world politics start taking place that you might remember. I do vividly from the start of this. So let's turn our focus in September to Iran. And on September 8th, Iranian army troops opened fire on rioters in Tehran, killing 122 and wounding 4,000. And this happens and causes a huge upheaval, including a 2 million person demonstration against the Shah of Iran on December 11th. And what's interesting is I guess the Shah was trying to modernize or westernize the civilization. So the riot, not only did they have a demonstration, but they destroyed symbols of westernization, including banks and liquor stores.
Ooh, liquor stores.
Yeah. We haven't visited those this week. So
nope, we haven't.
But yeah, so this set the stage for the Shah to flee Iran and for the Ayatollah Khomeini to become rise in power in Iran. So and if you remember Ayatollah Khomeini, and all of this kind of led into the Iranian hostage crisis, and those are future months. But again, this is another one of those moments that was really interesting. It's something that in my small mind of 6 years of age, I do remember a lot of the issues with Iran and those kind of things. And Iran had a hard year. So in addition to that, there was a 7.4 magnitude earthquake that same month that affects the city of Tabriz, Iran. And it was basically a maximum intensity that was considered violent on the Richter scale. At least 15,000 people were killed. So on top of this big riot and this change of power, 15,000 people are killed in Iran at that same month with a big earthquake. So lots going on there. So interesting stuff in that world event. And like I said, it's stuff that leads to other things that I remember vividly about. I've talked about in my solo interview about El Paso. And I remember we at the end of we have a mountain in El Paso. At the end of the mountain, there's a star. And it used to be that the star was only lit during Christmas season. But I remember when the Iranian hostage crisis happened, they kept that star lit until the hostages came home. So I just remember those things being burned in my memory. Yeah. So couple of things that I thought were kind of cool that President Carter did. On October 10th, President Carter signs a bill that authorizes the minting of the Susan B. Anthony dollar. Any of you all have some of those as collectibles?
I do. I do actually have one of those.
Yeah, me too. Do you have some?
Do I? Oh yeah, absolutely. It's matter of fact, I think I got several that were still in like plastic cases from the.
That's cool. From the actual minting,
the Franklin Mint. Yeah.
Oh, that's so cool.
Wow.
Yeah. My dad collected a lot more coins than I realized, and when he passed away, I found a bunch of them, and there's a bunch of Susan B. Anthony dollars, and there's pretty cool.
That's cool.
Another thing that's really close to home for us this week, and something that Steve, you and I have talked about, and I was excited to mention this when we talked about this today, Steve, is on October 14th. President Carter signs a bill into law which allows home brewing of beer in the United States.
Yes. That's probably the only thing he got right during his presidency.
That's exactly, what I was gonna say, man.
Yeah. So I was like, so he's not all bad, He's not all bad.
He messed up Iran and the gas prices and stuff, but man, he got beer right.
So prior to this bill being passed, it was illegal to brew your own beer.
Apparently, it was not something that was
that's just a grand shame.
Yeah, I know. I mean, you think of the speakeasies where you couldn't get it publicly in the 1920s, and I guess you really couldn't make your own until this happened. So interesting. Yeah, it allows homebrewing of beer on October 14th, 1978. And to this day, like you and I were talking, Steve, we're talking about these growlers like we're doing on this trip coming up. And wouldn't it be fun to be able to create our own and share that? So that's kind of cool. Yeah. So those are a lot of the things that happened in globally, and I've mentioned a couple of things at the United States, but let's dig a little bit deeper into the United States politics of the year. And again, you can go into a lot of deep dives with the Carter administration and people who agree and disagree with his policies. But the 1978 elections were congressional elections. They were held on November 7th of 1978 to elect the members of the 96th United States Congress. The election occurred in the middle of Democratic President Jimmy Carter's term, obviously, and the Democrats also retained control of both houses of Congress. So the House and the Senate were both controlled by Democrats, very, very much locked. However, what's interesting about this is what it leads up to. So the Democrats lost 3 seats, though, in the United States Senate to the Republican Party. They won the nationwide popular vote for the House of Representatives by a margin of 8.9 percentage points, but they lost 15 seats to the Republicans. The election represents the most recent instance in which the president's party retained control of both houses, but the last one was 2002, where it was the Republican side where they retained both the Republican House and Senate. So anyway, but here's what's interesting. In the gubernatorial elections, this is something that's kind of pertinent to what's going to happen next. Republicans picked up 6 seats. But let's talk about who they were. So among the newly elected governors in 1978, future President Bill Clinton was the governor of Arkansas. Mm-hmm. And here we go. Clinton's eventual successor as president, George W. Bush, ran as the Republican nominee in Texas's 19th congressional district, but he was defeated by a Democrat. And I would love for you to tell me if you know who the Democrat who is a Texas Tech, since we're all from Texas Tech.
Preston Smith.
No, not Preston Smith. That was a little earlier, but Democrat Kent Pence.
No way.
Yes. He beats George W. Bush as the Republican nominee in the 19th congressional district in Texas. Kind of interesting. Georgia's district was flipped from Democrat to Republican by future House Speaker and one-time presidential candidate Newt Gingrich. Yeah. So a lot of names that would kind of go into the future. And so, they were modest in the Republican side, but you were starting to see this potential swing to what we talked about in 1984 with the massive, what they call in this research, I said it's not my term, but the massive Reagan revolution that was to come. So you can start seeing that balance of power shift from a Democrat held party to swing to the Republican parties in that. So interesting there. Other notables, just to talk about in 1978, the Electronic Fund Transfer Act was passed, and it established rights and liabilities of consumers as well as responsibilities of all participant in electronics funds transfer activities. So I thought that was interesting. Here's another thing that I thought was really interesting. It was a proposal for the District of Columbia. It was called the District of Columbia Voting Rights Amendment. And this is a big deal if you think about elections of today, because it would have given the District of Columbia full representation in the United States Congress, full representation in the Electoral College system, and full participation in the process by which the Constitution is amended. And if you think about that, is a very heavily blue territory, and that could be a very pivotal thing that happened. So it was proposed by the Congress on August 22nd, and the legislatures of the 50 states were given 7 years to consider it, and they had to have ratification by 38 states to amend to become part of this Constitution. And after that limit was reached, only 16 states had ratified it, and so it never came into being. But I mean, you think about the significant impact that having a couple of more electoral college seats, a couple of more Senate seats could impact on the country. So I just thought that was a really notable thing that it didn't happen, but the proposal. And I remember even hearing in this last election and a couple of elections before that, is if DC would have had blah, 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 this would have been blah, 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 So that echo is still happening to this day about that. So lots of interesting things happen in the world and in the U.S. as far as world events and politics. There were significantly others. I mean, significant other things, but to go through a year of world events in a 30-minute episode is impossible. So those were the ones that I felt were, I guess, worthy of news in a summary of a podcast of this year. What things that I mentioned stuck out to y'all?
I mean, first of all, where you sort of kicked it off with the GPS launch, and I solely rely on the GPS now. So my phone tells me where to go and how to get there. And but I still remember very well the days where you reached out to AAA to get your trip tick to get the directions on how to get from point A to point B, and that was sort of fun. You knew that you had to keep an eye on the odometer, see how many miles had passed, and see if you were close to that next right turn or that left turn, and sort of like sort of compelled to maybe go old school in the next road trip just to stop having the phone tell me how to get somewhere to do that instead. And so I mean, it's crazy that you would assume that technology existed a lot longer than it has, because it feels like it's been around forever. But
it does. And have you all seen that? It's I think it's an Instagram tweet or Twitter or something like that. That the dad said, the kids in the back seat, and said, "You mean you used to be able to find directions with a paper map?" And they said, "Yeah, you did." And they said, "Like pirates?" I thought that was pretty funny. I'm like, yeah, that's cool. We should put our Jolly Roger flag up and do it again. But hey, what was I remember vividly using, what was the big map in Houston? What was that thing called?
Key map.
Yeah, Key Map.
Key Map. Yeah. And there was, orange, I guess, Maps Goes were in Dallas.
Orange.
Yeah. I remember having to use those things. And I'm not sure, I don't know how more people didn't die on the highway flipping pages on those suckers trying to find where they were going.
No kidding.
I mean, those things were bigger. Those were several hundred pages thick, if I remember right. And I just remember, like, you really hoped you had one that was up to date, that you didn't just like drop off a map of an intersection that was under construction or something. But, yeah. So, but you're right. That was a fun, nostalgic way of traveling.
Yeah, I mean, back in Houston days, with those key maps didn't really help you once you got outside the Beltway, because everything out the Beltway was fairly new and growing so rapidly. So yeah, to your point, if you didn't have an updated map, updated key map, you weren't good outside of where Noel lives now.
Biting the bullets and asking for directions, right?
Yeah.
Or telling your wife, "No worry, I know where I'm going."
Yeah.
Noel, what's some things on 78 that's kind of stuck out to you? Do you remember any of these? I mean, you were 4. So does any of this, does any of this stand out, or like the repercussions of that? Was that ever a discussion in your family?
I mean, no. I mean, I remember the hostage crisis and stuff. I remember that early on was, like it was a big topic of conversation about what Carter was going to do to get the hostages back, if they were going to be able to get them back, And then, that was late. That was after 78. This was more into the 80 election when it was like, my parents were talking about, do they feel like that Reagan would have a better chance of being able to get the hostages back? I mean, that seemed to be the thing that everybody was so focused on, was just being able to get those hostages back and stuff. And so that's what I remember of the time.
Yeah.
The whole GPS starting in 78 is just mind boggling. Like I can't believe it's been around that long. I know at the beginning it wasn't for like it wasn't launched with the intent of getting us from home to work, or from us to home to doctor's office, or whatever, like how it's used today, or from DoorDash to get from Chipotle to our home or whatever. But that's certainly the way it is, being used today. But it's pretty amazing that that all started back in 1978. I'm continuously amazed at the number of like aha moments that occur every single year that we take a look at, guys. It's amazing to me. And
exactly.
1978 is no different from the other 2-3 years we've looked at.
Yeah, I looked a little bit more about the Navstar. It was developed by the Department of Defense to provide all-weather, round-the-clock navigation capabilities for military, ground, sea, and air forces. So definitely took on a completely different meaning with what we use for today.
It was originally used like how to defeat, how to protect the U.S. from foreign enemies, and how to give our military a leg up in the war to keep us safe from foreign enemies. But it's amazing how it's transferred from that to get Chipotle to home. Like it's
where's the nearest store to find growlers?
Exactly.
Yeah, I remember very much the energy crisis of the 70s. Of course, in 78 we were just starting to climb out of that. I mean, really ran for a full decade from 70 to 80. And but I remember very much my dad always saying close the door all the way, keep the lights off, be very energy conscious. Of course, my dad was also a power plant manager, so he was
he knew what was going on.
He was in his DNA. But I just remember, the prior year, one of the first things Carter did was, in 77 was to challenge everybody to make personal sacrifice and to help save energy by, turning down the thermostat and putting on a sweater instead of, using oil to heat your home or whatever, and just essentially suck it up and wear a sweater instead. And so it wasn't, it was probably a prudent thing to do. And he role modeled it by doing that exact thing in the White House. And everybody complained about the White House being cold all the time while he was president. But, it's, I remember people sort of resented him not doing more and wanted personal sacrifice instead.
Interesting. That's funny. So yeah, lots of things. It's funny to sit there and try to reach way back in your memory and go, I do vaguely remember these things. And then also, like you say, things that we're using today that just were beginning then. And then music that we were listening to while we're in our car with our GPS, right? That Steve mentioned, right?
I know.
Let's listen. I have the need for the Bee Gees as I go to, find the nearest Chipotle. So it's funny.
Yeah. Hey, I'm curious as kids, thinking back to 78, do you remember, being scared of the Russians or being concerned about going to war with the Russians at all?
I don't remember that. I don't think as much until maybe I got a little older. I knew about them, but I didn't know much about the whole situation. So to me, it wasn't until probably the 80s. Early 80s.
I'd say the same thing. I mean, the war games,
yes,
that movie kind of like, oh, we've got an enemy. And then it was like Rocky IV. Oh yeah. It was, it was sort of the pop culture. I think it sort of introduced me to the fact that we actually have like we have an international enemy, that's of course, I was a child, so like, that just tells you, I mean, there's probably some level of communication that was going on in the news and stuff that our parents were aware of it. Yeah. But for a child, what were they aware of? It was only through movies, like it just said, was where I became aware that there's this enemy out there called Russia, and they're awful.
Right.
We need to not beat them. That was kind of the message.
In 1978, I thought the Empire were the bad guys. With a year after Star Wars came out,
Yeah, exactly.
So, but funny that you mentioned War Games, because that it was 1983, and the television show, I don't know if you remember, The Day After. Did y'all see this?
Yes.
So both of those were in 1983, and that's, I believe, like you say, Noel, was the year I was 11 at that point, and that was probably the year where I was like, okay, so there's something bigger going on that I don't quite fully understand. So definitely interesting. So I would love for our listeners to kind of chime in on that. What years did you really feel that there was a prominent concern there? Some of our listeners might be a little older than us, can kind of maybe reach back a little bit more into the 70s with a more robust memory and mature age. I would love to hear what your thoughts were on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think it's interesting as adults now. I mean, it's part of the beauty of this podcast is, as adults now, what you can understand the importance of what is being communicated through our movies and TV to our kids, right? Mm-hmm. Like what is the message that's being communicated through our movies and TV to our kids? Because it's as we just illustrated back in 1978, 1980, or whatever it was, 1983. That's when we first knew that there was an enemy that called Russia, and it was because of movies and TV.
Yep.
So, it's important for us as adults to look at what movies and TV is communicating to our children. What are they being told? What message are they receiving through that medium? But anyway, it's interesting.
Definitely makes an impact, and we're here to be the examples of that without even realizing it.
Yep, totally.
So, thanks for letting me kind of run down 1978 world events and politics. I got to say that it is definitely not the episode that I personally would pick to listen to on a road trip. World events and politics can kind of be drab to me, but there were some fun events that came out, and I hope that that was a little bit enjoyable for some folks to listen to. And thanks for hanging in there with me.
Yeah, you bet. It's always interesting whenever, just one last thought, that people that were allies or countries that were allies back in 78, like Afghanistan, are not now.
Right.
And how the global, I guess, temperature can change so much. So,
and not a long amount of time, in the world standard.
Yeah.
So pretty interesting.
Nice job, Keith.
Good job, Keith.
Hey, thank you all. Thanks for hanging in there with me. I know it's a tough bite, so appreciate it.
No, it's good. It's really good.
It was good.
You always expect, you're like 78 to, especially early in our lives to not necessarily have a lot of, I remember those moments. And, but I remember bits and pieces of what you talked about, and just have a perspective of what's going on in 78 to the years that come later, soon thereafter, to know how that impacted the memories we do have is pretty cool to hear. So
it really is.
So Keith, thanks so much for 1978 world politics and our world events and politics and everything is very interesting. Enjoy. As enjoyable as world events and politics can be in 1978, you did a great job.
And thanks for drawing that for me, Steve.
So guys, thanks everybody for listening. Appreciate y'all tuning in for another episode of the Wayback Chronicles, and tune in next time when we talk about 1978 technology. So what that's going to be interesting. It's going to be tying some connections between 1978 technology and then what we talked about in 1984 technology. So there are some connections, and it's pretty interesting.
Cool.
So hope you tune into it and listen to it. It's going to be pretty awesome. So
Noel's going to take us down the world of the exciting world of Scantron cards.
Yes, exactly. Scantron.
Your 2 pencil leads ready. Let's go.
Exactly. All right, guys. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. This is Noel Kirsch. I'm here with Keith Abbott and Steve McKelkey for the Wayback Chronicles. Thanks for tuning in.
Take care, buddy.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks for listening to the Wayback Chronicles. All shows are written and produced by Noel, Keith, and Steve. Massive thanks to those who made these memories possible for us through the years. All songs, sounds, and effects have been attributed in the comments section and through links listed on waybackchronicles.podbean.com. We look forward to taking you way back again in the very near future.